Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on the UN Human Rights Council at 15, in which we will talk about the role and perspectives of the Council. I'm head of research at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, and this seminar we have the honor of co-organizing with the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, with tremendous support from the Embassy of Switzerland in Poland. I just want to say that we are very thankful at PISM to the Geneva Academy, whose executive director, Felix Kirchmeier, is with us here today. I just want to acknowledge his presence, and Felix will co-moderate the session later on. By way of introduction, and before turning over to Matthias Dettling, the Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of Switzerland in Poland, I just want to say a few words about the Human Rights Council and introduce to you why we thought this seminar might be of use and is important to hold it today or this year, when the Human Rights Council turns 15. So I think it's very easy to engage in criticism of the Human Rights Council, and this has been done on numerous occasions. It is indeed true that there are states in the Human Rights Council and have been there for a number of years and instances, states that do violate human rights, and no member state has a clear record there, very clear record. And these violations range from criticizing opposition and curbing the possibilities of activism, political activism, to even state violence or crimes against humanity. Yet, I think there are two arguments that still speak to the validity of the Human Rights Council and the importance of the body to be there and work. One is that the forum itself is a forum of vehement debate about human rights, and that has a value in itself. And secondly, the Human Rights Council does a lot of work, very specific work, of which we are not aware of, or the general public is not aware of, but I think it significantly advances this work, significantly advances the cause of protecting human rights globally and locally. I myself am a member of the advisory committee to the Human Rights Council, and the advisory committee, about which I just want to take 2 minutes to talk about, is mandated to prepare 4 reports. One on the negative effects of terrorism on the enjoyment of human rights. The second one is on the current levels of representation of women in human rights organs and mechanisms. The third one is on the situation regarding racial equality in the world. And the fourth is about new and emerging digital technologies and human rights. So these topics sort of reflect the really fiery and important and timely issues that impact human rights globally. It is true that there are controversies on several topics, but the value also of preparing these reports by the advisory committee is that we are trying to find common ground and a common denominator in such difficult issues, because we do perceive as countries and as groups of states human rights a bit differently. And the second thing I want to say about the advisory committee is that in our sessions, and we have just concluded in February, the 25th session of the advisory committee to the Human Rights Council, the value of it is that it is not only an occasion to meet the experts, who of us are a dozen plus. It is not only an occasion to meet and talk about the reports that we are writing and write them and discuss these issues, but also to meet with member states, because it is the Human Rights Council that mandates our work. But not only to meet with the states, but also NGOs and other stakeholders. And this opportunity to hear from the civil society is extremely is crucial for the work and the reports that eventually come to fruition. With that, I want to turn to Matthias Dettling. Matthias, before you go, I just want to say that we are live streaming on YouTube, which I omitted to say at the very beginning, on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitter. And please do post questions to our panelists and experts who are here with us today, because we will try to show both the sort of general work of the Human Rights Council and specific mechanisms and instruments that the Council has and uses. Please do post questions. You can do it in all three fora. Matthias, over to you. And thanks for doing it with us.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and a very warm welcome to everyone. On behalf of the Embassy of Switzerland in Poland, a warm welcome to this webinar dedicated to the Human Rights Council. First of all, I would just like to thank our partners, the Polish Institute of International Affairs and the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights for convening this meeting and also for putting this very exciting program together. I would also like to extend my thanks to everyone who is here with us now live. Like to thank you for your curiosity, for your interest in the work of the main intergovernmental body responsible for the promotion and protection of human rights worldwide, the Human Rights Council. And it is actually a very opportune moment to talk about the work of the Council, because the world has been faced with a major public health crisis over the last year, which has, one, challenged us in terms of our individual freedoms, and two, exacerbated the vulnerability of the least protected in society in terms of their health, also economically and socially. And I recall the report of the UN Secretary General from last year. It was called "We Are All in This Together." And he says that human rights are critical for the pandemic response and the recovery. So therefore, the work of the Council remains as relevant as ever. So we're very happy to partner on this event, even though actually my country is currently not a Council member. But because we have always been very active, both as member and observer states, since the Council was created back in 2006, we are of course interested in making the Council's role and its activities better known to the wider public. Moreover, human rights promotion is an important pillar in our foreign policy. And last but not least, we are also the host state of the Council, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Treaty bodies, all in Geneva. We are therefore delighted that together with the Polish Institute of International Affairs and our Geneva-based long-standing partners, the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, we've been able to gather eminent experts that have really been in the very, very midst of the Council's work, yet in very different functions with very different experiences and insights. And I would like to thank Ambassador Czech, Camelia Kemileva, and the UN Special Rapporteurs Anaïs Marin and Clément Woul for joining us today. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over to our co-moderators who have already been introduced. Felix Kirchmeier, who is the Executive Director of the Geneva Human Rights Platform at the Academy, and Shimon Zaremba, who is the Head of the Global Issues Program at PISM. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So I will take over after you. Well, let's start with the introduction of our viewers to the topic. And I would like to address Ms. Camelia Kamileva, who is the senior consultant with the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. She also worked as special assistant to the president of the UN Human Rights Council and previously at the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, Camelia, could you introduce our viewers a bit with what the Council is and what is importance within the UN system and, you know, the political dynamics in the Council? Because as Patricia said, well, you know, within these 15 years, we have been hearing in the media from time to time about, you know, the conflicting visions of human rights between the West and the developing world, about the too much focus on the Israeli and Palestinian conflict and so on and so on. So I'd like you to focus a little bit on that.
Thank you very much, Simon. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I didn't know the Polski Instytut Spraw Międzynarodowych, the Polish Institute of International Affairs, but you have an amazingly comprehensive website, lots of activities. So I'm very happy to be here with you. I must say, the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs I know better. So I will not also speak about them, but just to say I'm very happy to be on this panel with you. So as people say, the Human Rights Council is something like, could be said, is my first child, because it was born before my other two child, exactly in 2006, on a Swiss initiative, which was handled then on a practically piece of papers to the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. Then, of course, many other diplomats joined to create this, as Matthias said, international universal body at universal level to deal with human rights. Now, the official status of the Human Rights Council is what we say in the, basically in the official talks like this one, is that this is the first such high-level intergovernmental body at universal United Nations level, composed of 47 member states. So only states can sit in the council out of 193 states, which are members of the United Nations. And these states, the 47 members, can sit only for 2 terms, 3 years. So you can sit 3 years, then you have to be re-elected 6 years, and then you have to leave the council, which is obviously a very democratic system. And not to hide anything, many of the governments sitting in the Human Rights Council in their homes, they are not elected democratically, but they have to comply to some democratic rules of election and sittings in the Human Rights Council, as you see. So already it's educational, I think, to apply and to sit in the Human Rights Council for some governments. Governments need to present voluntary commitments to apply for elections. And right now, as Poland, and I will not step on this ground because we have Ambassador Czech with us, but Poland has a 5-page voluntary commitment published on the website of the United Nations to apply for the election in the Human Rights Council. And apparently Poland managed to convince the other member states to vote for it, as 124 member states, which is huge, voted for Poland. And right now, Poland is member of the Human Rights Council, meaning that you're doing well already. So the Human Rights Council is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is the highest and most representative body of the United Nations, with all the member states sitting there. And that's, in a very short nutshell, what the Human Rights Council is. Now, the other story of the Human Rights Council is that this is a very big room in which sits ambassadors who are coming from these member states and observer states countries, with their staff, with their counselors, with the other diplomats. And what they do, actually, they negotiate resolutions. So this is still quite abstract, but just to understand what that means, these are national policies, these are things to which governments are attached, and you have differences. You might have a government of a country which is more attached to what we call civil and political rights, and you can have other governments which care more about other rights. Nonetheless, they sit together in a big meeting room. So it's a very big meeting room. You must have seen it, or you can see it on the website of the Human Rights Council, and present and discuss basically draft resolution text on different topics. These topics come as a discussion, and I can give you one example of it, among others, because we are speaking about women's rights. One of these big discussions are going around women's rights, discrimination, non-discrimination of women and girls, policies of states about women and girls, etc. And this is an ongoing permanent discussion, which from time to time, actually every year or every 2 years, it depends on the text, is materialized in a resolution. And it is very important to be in the Human Rights Council, not only because of the voting or no voting of these resolutions, but to participate in the permanent debate. When you participate in the debate of these discussions in the Human Rights Council, you make your point, so it is important to be there, or you hear the points of the others, which you can adjust yourself, bring the points of the others back home. And this is how the so-called permanent debate on the universal level on human rights is held in the Human Rights Council. This is the shortest explanation I can give. It is political, it is led by states, but the Human Rights Council is also the body in the United Nations system which accepts huge participation by what we call civil society. Now, make no mistake, when we speak about civil society, we don't only speak about big human rights international NGOs such as Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. We also speak about businesses. So, for example, you have some businesses which have associations like Nestle, for example, which is a business, as you know, a big company in Switzerland. They can participate in some forums of the Human Rights Council. Basically, other private entities can participate. Also, civil society in a larger sense, churches or other movements can participate. So this is quite a huge and rich debate, which is ongoing almost permanently in the Human Rights Council, in which I think is more interesting to participate than not to participate, if this was one of your questions.
Thank you, Camelia. And well, my follow-up question will be, well, what, in your opinion, are the challenges, before the Council, and what may be the challenges in the future? And particularly, do you think that the Council needs further reform, as some argue, or not?
Well, I think that the Council is auto-reforming itself constantly. To give you one example very shortly, for many years there was two conflicting debates in the Human Rights Council. One which was around a resolution which was called Freedom of Religion and Belief, put forward by some Western and other countries. And the other resolution or conflicting text was called Defamation of Religion, which was provoked by these discussions around whether Muslim religion is attacked or not by Western media, etc. So this was somehow during years unhealthy debate, because there were two controversial issues run on a political ground and probably not that much on the substance ground. And one beautiful day, I should say, it was not one day, but one process, some bright diplomats with their bright governments decided to find a common ground and to start quarrel about these conflicting texts. And if I'm not mistaken, by itself in 2011, the two groups of conflicting, if you wish, parties came to a consensus and reformed the two texts to become a consensual text on freedom of religion and belief, which is one of the main topics in the Human Rights Council. There are many other examples. This actually gives you the example that the Human Rights Council is auto-reforming or auto-adjusting itself, and it is as good as the governments which are sitting in it. So by being in the Human Rights Council today, Poland is also participating in this constant reform of the Human Rights Council. So I don't believe we need to settle one date or 1 year of a reform, but we shall continue to watch these processes and this continuous reform of the Human Rights Council constantly. On your second question, future challenges, again, the future challenges are the challenges the governments are facing themselves. There are many, as you know. One, and probably quite harmful to the human rights fora and human rights discussion in general, is the so-called, it's difficult word, renationalization of human rights. Meaning that after a very happy euphoria of the beginning of 21st century, you know, we ended up the Cold War, everybody was very open. There was sort of a big window of opportunity, a huge push in the human rights area, namely Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, many important human rights treaties such as the Right of the Child Treaty and others were elaborated and adopted during this period. And today, with some phenomenon, like as we know, the Trump administration, but thankfully this is over, but also other governments try to renationalize, meaning like a step back to deal with human rights not openly and not accepting their universality, but saying we will sit in the Human Rights Council to impose sort of a national vision of how we think and how we see human rights should be. So to me, the bigger challenge, one of the bigger challenges, and probably this renationalization of the human rights by governments, and where are we going out of there? So that's one of it. I don't see as a challenge, and I know that this will probably come up later in the debate, the thing that, or the fact that some governments are running away of the Human Rights Council, because there are no such governments. I rather see, again, with the huge example of Trump administration, and before him, few people remember the Bush administration also ran away. So the US are very known with running away and coming back in the Human Rights Council. It's almost amusing. But there are no other governments running away. You have rather the challenges of governments coming into the council, not to be open and cooperative, but to impose a vision or impose an agenda. And this actually is becoming embarrassing.
Okay, well, you have ended on a, I would say, less positive note, but well, I really like your optimistic point of view as regards the constant readjustment of the Human Rights Council. Hopefully so, hopefully so. Well, I would like to turn now to the more state perspective, you know, of one of the members of the council. And here I would like to address Zbigniew Czech, the ambassador of Poland and permanent representative of Poland to the United Nations office at Geneva. Welcome, Your Excellency. My question, first question would be, why did Poland want to become a member of the Council? What is the reason to join this body for a state? And how, after joining the body, Poland engaged in the works of the Council?
Well, thank you very much, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, thank you very much for inviting me and for for having this discussion, a very important one, very timely one, as we have started our second year of the membership in the Council. Referring to your question, I would say that Polish membership in the Human Rights Council should be seen as a continuation of Polish broader engagement in the form of the United Nations. As you know, but before I respond to this question, let me make a few remarks on the Council itself, as in my opinion, those factors that I'm going to highlight have a very important and very heavy impact on the functioning of the Council. Also, I'm saying this from the perspective of the state member of the Council. So let's start from membership. We should bear in mind that the Council is composed of the states, 47 member states, which are elected by the General Assembly. And the composition of the Council reflects the geographical representation of regional groups in the United Nations. So we have the distribution of seats among the United Nations regional groups in accordance with the following pattern: 14 states from Africa, 13 states from Asia, 6 states from Eastern Europe, 8 states from Latin America and Caribbean, the GRULAC regional group, and 7 states from the Western European and other group, WIOC. I think it is important to bear these key parameters in mind, as we have a considerable bearing on the deliberations and on the dynamics and on the decisions made within the Council. Now, referring back to the Polish membership and the reasons for our applying for the membership in the Council. As you know, we were elected, Poland was elected as a member of the Council in 2019. It is not our first time in the Council. We have served as a member of the Council previously in 2006, 2007, then in 2010, 2013, and now it is our third time as a member state in the Council. We have also the opportunity of being the president of the Council. Poland served as a president of the Council in 2013. So it is not a completely new phenomenon for Poland to be in the Council. As we advocate, and we have advocated always for human rights and consider the human rights as one of the most important out of 3 pillars of the whole UN system. And we see that there is a kind of an undisputable link between the human rights and the global security. As you know, Poland served as a non-permanent member state within the UN Security Council. And we see our membership now in the Human Rights Council as a means of continuation of our engagement that started with the non-permanent membership at the Security Council in 2018. We were in the Security Council in 2018, 2019. Our engagement into promoting human rights around the world, and it is also the way we try to seize the momentum of our membership in the Security Council and to continue our engagement this time in the Human Rights Council. To our sense, the election of Poland to one of the most important UN bodies, confirms Poland's commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms at both national and international level. A few words about the mechanisms and the special procedures and the treaty bodies. These are the mechanisms surrounding the Council, or cooperating or being a part of the broadly taken Human Rights Council structure. And we have procedures and mechanisms such as the Universal Periodic Review. There we have advisory committee consisting of 18 members. Now we are very happy that the member of the advisory committee is our colleague, Professor Patricia Sasna, who is present with us today. And this advisory committee serves as the Council think tank, a kind of a think tank, providing the Council with expertise and advice on thematic human rights issues. Then there is a very, very important pillar of the whole UN infrastructure on human rights, that is complaint procedure. Complaint procedure branch of the Human Rights Council. Why is it so important? Why I underline the importance of this complaint procedure branch? Because that is, in fact, one of the very few, if not the unique, vehicle allowing individuals and organizations other than states to bring human rights violations to the attention of the Council. In fact, every person that feels himself or herself in a position of being of her or his rights are violated could bring the complaint to the complaint procedure. We also know that the Human Rights Council works with the UN special procedures established by the former Commission of Human Rights, and Human Rights Council somehow took over this special procedures established, and this mechanism is made of special rapporteurs, special representatives, independent experts, and working groups that monitor, examine, and advise, and publicly report on thematic issues regarding human rights situation in specific countries. Referring to the Polish context of those procedures, first I shall say that Poland has extended and maintains a standing invitation to all human rights special procedures. Since 2001, Poland has received many visits of special procedures, and we fully cooperate with all the international human rights mechanisms. What is more, Polish involvement also is pronounced by the presence of Polish nationals as members and experts of Human Rights Council special procedures. The nationals, Polish nationals are holding mandates, for example, in the working group on business and human rights, Professor Elżbieta Karska, but also in the working group on people of African descent, Professor Michał Balcerzak. We also continue to voluntarily contribute to the budget of the United Nations Office of High Commissioner because, you know, we have the Council, but the administrative body that helps the Council functioning is in fact the Office of High Commissioner and High Commissioner herself. Now this post is discharged, this mandate of the High Commissioner is discharged by Madame Michelle Bachelet, with who we are cooperating very, very closely as a member of the Human Rights Council. And Poland, recognizing the need for a broader participation of the states in the work of the Council, not only in terms of the membership, but also as observer states. And here I'm referring to the physical participation of the delegates from EU and member states in the work of the Council. That's why we contributing to the voluntary trust fund to support the participation of the so-called least developed countries and the small island developing states in their work of the Council, because we know how important it is for those states to be present in the Human Rights Council room in Palais des Nations during the deliberations, during the sessions of the Council. So we are helping those states as we think that the membership in the Council should really be of universal nature. It should be accessible to all the UN member states, because the Council, as it has been already said by Madame Kamileva and by Madame Sasna, is the main intergovernmental body tackling the issue of human rights within the United Nations system. And since it is, to our sense, it is a logical consequence of the what's the word? The universalization of the United Nations should be also pronounced in terms of the universalization of participation of all the member states of the UN in the work of the Council. Now, if you allow me to refer to our current membership in the Human Rights Council. What are our priorities? What we would like to achieve as a member of the Council? And here I can say that we try to fulfill or implement the voluntary pledges that Poland made during the election campaign for the Council, as it was said by Madame Kamileva. And as a member of the Human Rights Council, Poland focuses inter alia on a set of key issues, such as strengthening the role of the international law and the human rights, considering those to be indispensable elements to achieve peace, security, and development in the world. Then strengthening the UN Human Rights Council as such, as a main body for protecting, respecting, and promoting human rights in the world. Then providing protection and social assistance to the most vulnerable social groups. There is a very important element of our mandate in the Council, that is protecting those who are most vulnerable to certain challenges, threats regarding their social rights, their economical rights. And these vulnerable groups include children, people with disabilities, but also members of religious minorities. We support efforts aiming at strengthening democracy, also rule of law and good governance that are being taken, all the initiatives that are being taken and implemented within the Council. Poland also very strongly advocates for the protection of civil society. As it has been already said, members of the civil societies, members of the non-governmental organizations are allowed to take part in the work of the Human Rights Council. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Human Rights Council is one of the very few international bodies in the world where the members of civil society are allowed to take the floor, to speak out, and they do so. During every session of the Human Rights Council, there is a possibility given to the representatives of civil society to take the floor, to pronounce their thoughts, their position, their desires regarding human rights in the world. Usually, from my experience as being the member of the council, usually those representatives are referring to country-specific situations, because they transfer to the council the issues that they witness on the ground in their respective countries. And they speak about this to the council. And it's very important, because it's very important that the council, while tackling a very broad range of issues regarding human rights worldwide, does not lose sight of a particular situation of individuals in particular countries. Because as one say, human rights are all about human beings. We are dealing with human beings whose rights are put in question, are being violated, who suffer from these violations, who are victims of those violations. And that's very important, that this participation of members of civil society is sustained in the deliberations of the council. As far as the engagement of Poland is concerned, let me say also that we are particularly involved in promoting good governance, and we continue to submit in the council the biennial resolution on the role of good governance in the promotion and protection of human rights. Last resolution of that kind, titled "The Role of Good Governance in the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights," was presented during the 45th session of the Human Rights Council in September last year, 2020. In the view of our priorities, also the following resolutions should be mentioned as those where we try to make a difference. We try to contribute to the work of the Council. And this is being done by our participation in the core groups. These are the groups of states that are supporting certain resolution, that are in fact are preparing the draft resolutions and then submitting this to the Council for approval. Preferably, such resolutions should be adopted by consensus, because as we know, and that is a quite important issue that I think should be underlined here, that the strength of the decisions of the Council very often is funded on the way how those decisions are being taken. Meaning, if the decision is taken by consensus, on consensual basis, that means that all the member states are in agreement with the decision, and that all the member states support the decision. Such a decision bears a very significant value, while some decisions are being made not on a consensual basis, but by the means of the vote. Why such a procedure is being chosen by the Council? Because there are certain member states that do not want a particular resolution, a particular decision to be made by the Council on the basis of consensus, and they call for the vote. Of course, the result of the vote, if vote in favor prevail, formally means that the council takes the decision. But we know very well that after such a decision taken as a result of the vote, everybody is looking very carefully who voted how, what was the voting pattern of member states, and then questions are being asked why this or that resolution was not supported by certain number of the member states. What was the reason? And here we enter the very difficult ground of so-called politicization of the council. What is it? What is the politicization of the council? And politicization of the council has many faces. The most visible one being the voting pattern of the member states on particular resolutions. But let me return to our engagement. So Poland is a member of the core groups dealing with the following resolutions, such as the role of prevention in the promotion and protection of human rights, then the resolution on negative impact of corruption on the enjoyment of human rights, strengthening efforts to prevent and eliminate child early and forced marriage, then the cultural rights and the protection of cultural heritage, and last but not least, conscientious objection to military service.
Ambassador, I'm afraid we are
yes.
close to running out of time. So, well, thank you very much for this broad introduction on what Poland is engaged in. And now, just to be able to give the voice to all our panelists, I would like to pass the floor over to Mr. Felix Kirchmeier, who will continue with our very, very interesting guests who are the special rapporteurs. Please, Felix.
Thank you very much, Simon. And let me first echo my gratitude here from the side of the Geneva Academy for this collaboration with PISM and the Swiss mission in Poland. It's great to have this event jointly with you. And I think it's also great that this allows us to address a wide audience, actually, as we might have different audiences between the Geneva Academy and your institute. And I think it's, as Matthias Stettling mentioned at the beginning, very important to really reach to many audiences when discussing issues as important as the UN Human Rights Council. While my colleague Kamila Kemileva and Ambassador Czech have addressed the functioning and the development of the Council and also the Polish initiatives and the policy, I would like to turn now to two special rapporteurs, asking them a number of questions on the nature, purpose, and usefulness of special procedures of the Human Rights Council. Ambassador Czech has referred to special procedures, and let me add that they are often called the ears and the eyes of the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council establishes the mandates to obtain information and regular reports on thematic and country situations, and calls on all UN member states to collaborate with those independent experts. Currently, there are 44 thematic and 11 country mandates. With the support of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, special procedures complete a number of functions that have been enumerated by the ambassador before, including writing reports to the council, reporting to the council back on, say, their country visits or the violations, patterns of violations they have studied. Thematic mandates, just to give examples, also cover, for example, the right to food, the right to privacy, or the right to be free from torture, and they do so globally. Country mandates focus on one particular country situation, on various violations within that country. At the moment, there are, for example, mandates on Cambodia, Eritrea, and on Iran. I'm delighted that we have with us today representatives of both groups of those mandates, with the special rapporteur on the situation in Belarus and the special rapporteur on freedom of peaceful assembly and association. Let me first turn to Anaïs Marin, who is a researcher with the University of Warsaw and who holds a PhD from Paris Sciences Po, where she studied international public law and comparative politics with a focus on post-communist transformations in Central and Eastern Europe. She has published extensively on Belarusian domestic policies and serves currently as the UN Special Rapporteur on Belarus. As a background to that mandate, it was established in June 2012 by the UN Human Rights Council, and then the rapporteur was established, and the mandate, the Human Rights Council has continued this mandate since and renewed it every year. It's maybe also noteworthy, if we discuss later in the question and answer also on the politics of the Council, to note that there was already a special rapporteur mandate on Belarus under the predecessor of the Council, the Commission on Human Rights, which in the creation of the Human Rights Council was for a while abolished due to political considerations. But Ms. Marant, this is not what I wanted to discuss with you, but more directly the functions of the mandates and actually what you're doing. Let me maybe break that into two groups of questions. One would look really at the mandates, generally the thematic, the country mandates, sorry, and then we'd look more specifically at your mandate. So if I may ask first, what are the particularities of country mandates and how do you engage with the state concerned? Maybe you can give examples of good and not so good collaboration, and not only from your mandate, but also from other mandates on countries where, for example, collaboration with the state was slightly different. So first of all, with that question, over to you, Ms. Marant.
Thank you. I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to this important event. Answering your question, as you know, out of the 11 country mandates, most of them are actually not welcomed by the state concerns. This is the case of my mandate. I would stress that in other circumstances, depending on why the mandate was established, governments have seized the opportunity to engage with independent experts. I'm thinking, for example, about Mali. The special rapporteur and the independent expert on the situation with human rights in Mali his mandate was established pursuant to a resolution that was submitted to the Human Rights Council along agenda item number 10, which provides for technical cooperation. So he enjoys cooperation from the government, and they work hand in hand to address important issues and work towards the implementation by the state of the recommendations that were made by various UN and other human rights mechanisms. Unfortunately, my mandate, as several others, among the country specific ones, is not welcomed. It's not recognized. The government of Belarus has never recognized the resolution and never recognized the mandate holder and never extended him or myself, since I was appointed 2.5 years ago, an invitation to visit the country. So of course that significantly limits the extent of the engagement work that I can do, because I'm de facto non grata, which is extremely frustrating, as you can imagine, for a researcher who's dedicated already over 10 years of my life to research and advocacy on and in Belarus. So I haven't been able to visit the country. And however, there are opportunities, I believe, to engage with the government. I would say that the two instruments that I can use are, on the one hand, communications, and on the other hand, reporting, which is what I have been tasked with doing. When we say communications in special procedures, we refer notably to so-called letters of allegation, which we send to governments via their permanent mission in Geneva to address issues that were brought to our attention, usually by victims of human rights violations, or their lawyers, human rights defenders, NGOs, both local and international. And just to give you a sense of the activation, as you can imagine, of my mandate over the past year, given the serious human rights crisis currently still going on in Belarus. In 2020, I have sent 9 allegation letters to the government of Belarus, which was twice as many as the year before. The government replied to 7 of them because they were co-signed. Since the government doesn't recognize my mandate, if I would write alone, they would ignore my letters, but I'm thankful to other thematic mandate holders, and notably to Clément, who is with us today, for having co-signed the some of the letters we sent. And so he got the answers. I mean, those other thematic rapporteurs got answers from the government. We analyzed them, and to be honest, the tone is very often defensive or sometimes even accusatory, and we cannot really say that the government would comply with any of the recommendations we make. However, I think there is some added value to these letters, because I would say there's a didactic, pedagogic dimension to it, apart from the allegations about a certain abuse or violation that we observed or that was reported to us. In annex to the letters, we remind of the international human rights law standards that apply, and of the conventions that Belarus has signed and that apply as well. So I imagine myself, civil servants in Minsk sitting and having to process our letters at the MFA, and that suddenly maybe discover the existence of these conventions, because unfortunately human rights education and advocacy in Belarus is extremely limited. So I guess there is a added value here to these allegation letters. And then it's also possible to send so-called other letters. And I would stress that my colleague, the special rapporteur on the enjoyment of human rights in the context of the fight against terrorism, has recently issued an opinion on existing legislation and amended legislation in Belarus, which we foresee, we are afraid might be used in a discriminate and abusive way to silence, if it was even more possible than it already is the case now, human rights defenders and civil society organizations. And lastly, the reports are of course authoritative in a way, because they are used and referred to by the international human rights community. And so in my case, I have to issue 2 reports, one for the June session of the Human Rights Council, which is a panorama of the violations of the past year. So we just sent it. Actually, it's being translated now. It will be available in a month or so, maybe 2 months. And then a thematic report presented in the October session of the General Assembly in New York. And we are working on this one right now. And just so you know, it will be focusing on the issue of women's rights. So this is what I can tell you in 5 minutes. Maybe we can come back to other issues during the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I have a small follow-up question, and indeed, then we can come to the discussion also back later. I think it's great to hear that you gave the example of Mali, where actually government understood that it actually can benefit from a free consultancy from a UN expert. So actually that positive value of technical collaboration and cooperation with an expert who comes and discusses issues of the country. You have also mentioned the problem of a person non grata who cannot engage in the country. But there you mentioned the possibilities of still engaging with the government, and I think the collaboration with other mandates is a great example. But also, I think the value again of the Council of its setting in Switzerland that may allow you to meet here with people who you cannot meet in country. But so also, if you could elaborate a little more on how do you engage with NGOs or victims also, say, outside the country in that case?
Well, I happen to live in Warsaw, which is extremely convenient because there is a significant diaspora of Belarusians and increasingly refugees who have run away from Belarus in recent months or weeks, and so I have a chance to meet them. I have been integrated with this community for a long time already due to my other main activities, and therefore this has been useful over the past months. I also traditionally have 1 week, consultations with human rights defenders in Vilnius in February, usually and this year, unfortunately, it was held only virtually. So if you want me to tell you about the challenges of the past year, I mean, it was a combination of difficulties for my mandate last year because of the pandemic and because of the human rights crisis since the contested 9th of August presidential election. So I was unable to have like live meetings and country visits, including I wasn't able to come to Geneva for over a year now, which is of course problematic. However, thanks to new technologies, we have had a lot of virtual meetings, and actually, like everybody else who is monitoring the situation in Belarus, I have joined several Telegram or YouTube channels, which allow me to be informed almost live 24/7 of violations as they occurred. So I have like an enormous amount of firsthand testimonies, pictures and evidence of serious human rights crimes, including torture, which I'm very happy to hand over to specialists, because I'm not a specialist on torture, and some of the crimes are extremely severe, and it's more than time to fight impunity for these crimes. And I'm very happy that the Human Rights Council recently adopted a new resolution which establishes a mandate for the High Commissioner to with the assistance from special procedures and from eminent experts, to monitor specifically these crimes committed during and in the aftermath of the elections.
Thank you very much. Thank you for adding that information. As said before, we will also come back to that in the discussion. You also already referred to your colleague Clément Voulet, who is with me in the room. So I'll also move the camera over to him, so we actually have him in the picture instead of me. In October 2010, the Human Rights Council adopted the resolution establishing the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, and has extended it since. Clément Voulet has been Special Rapporteur since April 2018. He holds a degree in fundamental rights from Nantes University in France, a master diploma in international law and armed conflict from the Graduate Institute here in Geneva. And he worked as a human rights advocate and defender in his native country, Togo, and across Africa. He is also was working with the International Service for Human Rights, and since some years now as a colleague here at the Geneva Academy. We're very grateful for having you here, Clément, and obviously for having you here in this meeting. Let me turn to you also, looking first maybe generally at the country mandates, and then in your mandate in particular. And then with a little outlook also to the procedures and special procedures with the coordinating committee. I'll say a word on that. But first, maybe what are the particularities of thematic mandates? And nevertheless, you do engage, obviously, also with states. So via country visits, for example, how is that chosen? What is the agenda? How does a thematic mandate work? So over to you, Clément.
Yes, thank you very much, Felix. And let me also thank the Polish Institute of International Affairs, but also the Swiss Embassy in Poland, but also the Geneva Academy for inviting us, myself and Anais. I just wanted to say hello. For the great work you are doing, although the kind of big challenge that we are facing now around the Belarus issue, and you know that you can count on our support and our continued collaboration with you. You talked about the particularities. I think Anais mentioned already some of the specificity of the country mandate, but maybe one thing that is important to highlight is that a thematic mandate have a, I would say, universal coverage. You know, so you are not focused on one country. The issue that you are dealing with is the issue that for winning your mandate, it is association and assembly, but you cover all the country, no matter what the country signed the treaty or not. But you are mandated to kind of monitor the human rights violation and the trends, but also best practice in how this right is implemented. Because we have also some country mandate, because you have also mandate to engage, and this is what Anais was talking. For example, if you have a violation of the recent peaceful assembly, the suppression of peaceful assembly and the repression, I have, for example, to work with closely with the country mandate Anais in order to be able also to coordinate our action, because her mandate cover the human rights issue in the country, the whole country. So this is where we collaborate really with country mandate. Another specificity is also, like I mentioned at the beginning, we have universal coverage, so we are allowed also to visit other countries, many countries. You also asked how this happened. For example, in terms of choosing which country you visit, because a country visit is an important tool, and I will also say that is also one of the main tools of collaboration, one of the barometer to know if country wants really to improve the human rights situation or not, you know. So how do you choose that? Usually we don't have really a standard practice, but it depends also on how the mandate holder want to implement his mandate and how he see also what kind of strategy he has around pushing for the implementation of the right acts fall within his mandate. One way is that, okay, you decided, for example, you have a lot of information coming to you about the violation of the right to peaceful assembly, or you have information coming to you about the restrictive environment in the country is going through, how civil society is targeted and everything. And based on those information and based on also reliable sources that you have, you know that you have sufficient information to go in the country and to see what is going on in order to make recommendations. Because country visits is that. Go in the country, monitor the situation, make recommendations to the state, to the state, but also other stakeholders. And another aspect is also that there are some development in the country. There may be positive developments. There may be like a pushback in the country. And you see that your mandate is important at that time in order to either make impact or not. I just wanted to give you an example. When I was appointed in 2018 that you mentioned, my first visit was in Armenia and Tunisia. Why? Because at that time Armenia went through the revolution. I followed the revolution, and then there was a transition. And because the revolution was also triggered by peaceful protests, it was important for me to go in the country to discuss with the new leaders how it's important to strengthen this fundamental freedom and how civil society is important, women movement, and all of this. So I was, I can say, one of the first after this revolution, the rapporteur to go to the country. And it was also important because at that time the new authority was now developing plan, and there was also discussing about police reform because there was some issue, justice reform and everything. So they were able to hear me about how they can upload this fundamental freedom to the national legislation. But also civil society also, it was important for me to hear from civil society what didn't work well, why we have some there, what, all of those things. And then the second one was also Tunisia, because Tunisia went through the revolution, and for me it was important also to go to Tunisia and help the state authority on how they can strengthen rule of law in the post-revolution. Because I see my mandate as being there to strengthen the participation of citizen participation of civil society to the decision making, to the future of the country, or to the decision making, and what need to be what can look like rule of law, democracy, and human rights. So I decided then, for me, both countries. The reason why I decided to go to both countries was really to strengthen the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom and to not miss the opportunity that the transition gave me to influence that. And it was good because both countries, for example, when I was Tunisia, there was the whole discussion to repair what was an asset of the revolution, which is the law that gives freedom of people to form association. At At that time, state sanctuary authority was saying, no, because of this law, we have too many NGOs now, we have to restrict. So I was able then to stop this process. And when I present my report, the state was saying, after your discussion, after the discussion we had with you, we decided to not withdraw this law because we think this law is an asset for the revolution and it should be continued. And Armenia also, there was some positive also outcome in the reform of the justice, and then but also the whole issue about mining issue and peaceful protests around the mining issue. And I was able to convince the government to establish what I call the review process to ensure that some of the contracts given to the companies to see if those contracts was transparent, because a lot of community were complaining about that. And then yes, just to say, and then I visit also Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka. There also, Sri Lanka, for example, one of the criteria was about the possible pushback that we saw, because there was election coming up, and there was time that the new authority may push back the game in relation to the human rights. And then Zimbabwe was also the same, that the country was coming, want to collaborate now, and it was important for me to go there and try to strengthen also the participants research. So just to tell you that it depends on how the mandate holder see that. You also talk about a little bit the process around actually around the special procedure. If you
exactly, I thought actually because the mandate is one thing, but also the collaboration of mandates within the council is interesting, yes. I think. And if you see that you're independent experts, you're not staff of the UN, you're not directly submitted to any political orders of the council, but some countries, some governments, including even in the council, say that they are too independent. And so I think there is the coordination committee of special procedures, to which you have been a member for a while. So if you could say a word on that interaction between governments and special procedures in that framework, yes, please.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something at the beginning, which is quite interesting when you talk about the special procedure as eyes and ears of Human Rights Council. And it's exactly this is what some of the countries do not really accept. Because our independence, we are able also to go in the field, to be able also to come back and to report to the council on the actual reality in the country, what is going on. And in this process, sometimes we have quite a challenge, a collaboration with states. Some states either they think that a specific mandate was established, politically established, so they won't want to collaborate. Or some states, some countries may say that, okay, the way that the mandate is operating, there is a selectivity, which also was one of the former discussion which led to the establishment of the Human Rights Council also, that the mandate holder is not, it need to be, I mean, they may talk about the independence, but what they're talking is that some of the mandate holder may be focused on some of the countries, so they talk about this selectivity. But one thing that I want to mention here is that we have this coordination committee that is composed by a special rapporteur. It's not really a sanction body, it's kind of advisory body for the mandate holder themselves. And within one of the mandate of this coordination committee is to receive the complaint from state. When the state is complaining that, okay, the mandate holder step out of his mandate or do not comply with the code of conduct, the coordination committee receives this complaint, discuss with the mandate holder, also hear the opinion of the mandate holder, and then give its advice to the concerned country. But in general, one thing that is important to say is that many countries went beyond this procedure and saying that this is not enough. We need to establish an accountability mechanism for the mandate holder. But one thing that you mentioned is important. We are not paid, and the country, what makes us different to the system is that the UN give us this independence to be able to say things, to be able to report independently. And when we come and we report those independently, what we are expecting is to have frank conversation with states. Some states, because they don't want to accept our funding, they may see this as a way for the mandate holder to set out his mandate or whatever. But one thing I want also to mention here is that, for example, since I was in this coordination committee, we always receive, since I was appointed in 2000 from last year, 2019, we received almost, if I'm not mistaken, 22 requests, most of the 26 requests, and almost more than 15 was from the state. And one of the things is always communication, independence issue, and all of those things. But also we receive also some requests from our own colleagues that seek advice to say, this is what I said, this is what I want to do, and I want to see if there is any conflict of interest. Or I'm seeking your view about my relation with this country because I received this message from the country and everything. So we do that also. And I think for me, one thing, Philip, just to stop there, to say that also, I think the current procedure is working well. And it may be, it's important, we may have to strengthen it, and the mandate holder, they are human beings, they may also make mistakes, but I think that states also need to play their role in terms of collaboration. And this is what we're trying to remind also to the state, that we want conversation, we want they have to be collaborative. And if they see the mandate holder always like the enemy, this collaboration is not possible.
Thank you very much. And indeed, the collaboration and the positive aspects are very important. And there are coming questions in the chat functions, so I will hand over to my co-moderator who will take the first questions coming at us. So we use the remaining 15 minutes for some quick discussion. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Felix. Well, starting with the first question, which is in fact an elephant in the room, which has already been touched upon a little bit by Camelia, but well, it is a question about the US. So what are the effects, what were the effects of the US withdrawal from the Human Rights Council, and what will be the consequences of the US comeback, political, legal consequences? This is a question from one of our viewers.
So thank you very much, Simon, and I don't want to disappoint you and our viewers, but actually the withdrawal of US is rather a mouse in the room, not an elephant, because as I said, it had already happened before. Just a very couple of seconds really to remind you that during the George Bush administration, before Obama became a president in 2011, US withdrew again. And at that time, the Human Rights Council was very young, with not established practices. Nothing was really settled as it is of today. And at that time, we were much more scary that this can actually break the Human Rights Council much more. Now, the Trump withdrawal was somehow to be expected. It should be reminded that they withdrew from many other forums. They did it quite noisily, and to be honest, and to reply directly to the question, this has no legal consequences. The Human Rights Council is a political body. The US is one of the countries. Now, the slight difference was that under the George Bush administration, they were not actual member of the Human Rights Council. They were not one of these 47, while now under the Bush administration, they were. But even though the legal consequence is actually known, because somebody stepped in, took the place. This is a place of a Western country. So as I say, there is no legal consequence at all. Now, the political consequence of the withdrawal of the US was twofold. One of which we think probably immediately is sort of a negative one, because a big player from the Western community, the democratic countries, etc., is not anymore there. So some might think that this creates actually an empty space. Yes and no, because as I said, the space was taken immediately by another country from the same region. And also somehow when we knew the sort of, say, negative or at the best agnostic approach of the Trump administration to the Human Rights Council, and rather the non-constructive and non-cooperative tone, they would say, somehow, and not to be provocative, but I must say, somehow not that bad that they were not there during this period, because this actually allowed the Council to take further steps in some directions, probably less controversy, less voting. So these 3 years where the US was not there were probably also quite constructive, because they were not there. Not to emphasize this, but really to show the two parts of the story. And the third part of the story, and this is a Geneva anecdote, so I will share it with you, is that yes, the US withdrew officially, but you remember that there is a big US mission with many diplomats here who were experiencing some level of frustration. So what they did, they actually maintained the informal ways of communication with other governments, with NGOs, and actually they stayed tuned. They stayed between tuned and active on the work of the Human Rights Council behind the screens. They have even found a way for the US to cooperate with the Universal Periodic Review. So yes, the US withdrew from the plenary of the Human Rights Council, but did not withdraw from the mechanisms, from the periodic review. So at the end of the day, the story is very nuanced. It's good that they came back, but once again, it is one country among others. They're part of the group, they're part of the constituency. And this actually, to me, is a thesis to say it is, you'd better be there and engage than not being there, because when you're not there, you know, somebody else takes your place, and that's it. So that's my reply.
Thanks a lot. I suppose Felix has a question to the special rapporteurs, so I'm passing the floor to him.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, we had another question coming in, which I think is very interesting, also in the framework of ongoing initiatives by OHCHR and by a number of mandate holders, and quite relevant if we look at national context. It's about, how do you actually measure impact of special procedures? How do you evaluate that you do make a difference? Can you prove to states that you do so? I think in human rights work, we see that for academia and NGO, it's extremely difficult to prove causality in human rights work and the process. But I think we heard from Anaïs also before, and examples of positive engagement, and from you. So maybe first Clément, but also Anaïs, if you'd like to say some words on that.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. I think this is one of the main challenges of any human rights system. You know, how do you measure the impact that you're having? Well, at the special procedure level, besides the fact that you can see what are some of the legislative reform that happen after you send the communication, or some of the steps taken by the state in relation to the adoption of the law after your country visit. I think there is a very big challenge in terms of systematic monitoring the impact that is happening. This is why recently some of the special procedure we met here in the Geneva Academy, and we were because we want to also harmonize the way that the mandate will monitor this on the ground. Because we are rapporteur, we are close to the victim, and we have direct contact with state. We also have the we have also the opportunity to be able also to see what is going on, how state is implementing this recommendation, and what is happening around the country. And for us, it's kind of posed the problem of really the whole human rights architecture, and how the state also see the usefulness of the recommendation that we are making. And I think this is the process that we are currently engaged. But I must also add that we have, I mean, sometimes it's quick to see when it comes to the international intervention, but what is missing really is when it comes to the national one, where what is happening after the country visit, steps taken by the state, where the state is heading, what are some of the challenges. And this is something that we are engaged in the process now, which I think is really important for any human rights body also to include in their operation.
Thank you very much for that. Anaïs, would you like to add some aspects to this?
Well, indeed, it's difficult to measure impact, although I know it's important to justify the further work of the Human Rights Council, especially now. It's always being, asked to demonstrate its usefulness. Unfortunately, in the case of my mandate, because of the limitations I recalled earlier, I wouldn't brag about any kind of progress that I think can be attributable to my participation in, for example, international awareness raising and advocacy policies that we did jointly, for example, with Amnesty International on the issue of children in detention, for example. That was one topic I picked up during the first year. I can't brag about it because I'm always concerned about the possibility of victims being victims of reprisals for cooperating with UN human rights mechanism and nominally with my mandate. That's why it's extremely important. We always calibrate very closely the necessity for transparency and for protection of sources. And whenever we send either an allegation letter or even mention the name of a victim, even though it was all over the media at the time of an arrest or an assassination, for example, during peaceful protests in last fall, we request the it's mandatory to have the written consent, informed consent of the victim or his representatives, his or her lawyer, spouse, parents, children, etc., because they have to be aware of the fact that, unfortunately, the UN is an intergovernmental organization, and we have no power to defend them, to protect them against further reprisals. And this is always extremely, extremely sensitive. So on the one hand, I would say, yes, somehow when people get more attention, I mean, there is some impact when a human rights defender is being liberated, and it's not my responsibility. I mean, it's the whole effort that is being done by the international community to have that person released. But there is a lot still happening behind closed doors, and in terms of the diplomacy also, and being kept aware of how the government reacts to my involvement and my public declarations, including what I'm telling you now today. I'm sure they're monitoring it, and I have to be extremely careful, because they would be prompt to criticize any saying that would not comply with the code of conduct for special procedures mandate holders, which demand that we respect principles of independence, impartiality, objectivity, and neutrality. As you can imagine, we are human, and when we are dealing with extremely serious human rights violations, as what I have been observing in Belarus for the past year or so, it's extremely difficult to impartially comment, to stay impartial, to be honest.
Thank you very much. And reprisals are a big issue, and indeed the way how states monitor what you do. So the next question that comes in, and will be very short actually, because we're coming to the close, and I want to also give Matthias and Patricia the possibility to say a word again at the end of this meeting. But still, there is a question on the real impact of the Human Rights Council on the situation in Crimea. I'd give that to Camelia, but obviously we could put a full seminar on that. I'll give you 1 minute, but still a possibility to address it as it came from the audience.
Thank you very much, Felix. Now, the real impact, it depends what that means. But so the Human Rights Council is not a body which can impose sanctions. In the United Nations system, this is only the Security Council. But in this case, as you know, Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council, imposes the veto. So we have a Security Council which is completely blocked on this. It is to be faced. And then the Human Rights Council actually steps in as much as it can in its mandate. And we shall not forget that the mandate of the Human Rights Council is to raise awareness, to make allegations, to initiate some investigations, as Anais said. And the real impact, basically, for me, is that people on the ground and other people, they get a transparent, real picture of what is going on in Crimea. And already this is very important. Already this is something, because on the opposite, if we don't have the Human Rights Council, we have nothing, probably some media and others, but the Human Rights Council proposes not only information, but also a witness, also documentation, which actually helps the humanity to understand what is going on and to find a way to act now or later on. So that's the role the Human Rights Council plays.
Thank you very much. It was challenging in a minute. You managed. Thank you so much. We are coming to the close of this very interesting discussion, and I'd like to invite the hosts, actually, the main organizers, again, Patricia and Matthias, if you'd like to make a concluding remark. Patricia.
Thank you very much, Felix. Actually, you are yourself a co-organizer of this as well. So I just want to say it and thank the Geneva Academy for doing this with us, and also the Swiss Embassy. I think what the seminar showed is that we can, in a frank manner, cover a broad range of issues that have to do with the Human Rights Council, from the general political problems to the roles of the special rapporteurs, and we were able to get a really deep insight into your work. So I wanted to thank Mr. Clément Voulet and Anaïs Marin for being here and telling us all about this, but also, of course, Kamilia Kamilieva and Zbigniew Czech for showing us the political dimension and the overall importance of the Human Rights Council. Matthias.
Yes, I can only echo you, Patricia. I would also just say a word of thanks to all of our experts for sharing their knowledge, their insights, and their experience. I think this webinar has been a very rich and extremely interesting testimony of the important role of the Council, and in particular its continued relevance, with its ability to address with the various means that it has at its disposal. So the ability to address urgent human rights situations worldwide and also react to emerging issues. So thank you so much for having accepted the invitation to be part of this panel. And also thanks to our co-moderators for doing a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias and Patricia. And so thank you all the speakers. Thank you, Ambassador Czech. Thank you, Camelia. Thank you, the special rapporteurs, Anaïs and Clément. Thank you very much for having been here with us today. I think it was an amazing discussion. I would also like to thank all the audience who have been following that discussion on the various channels. And also thank you for your not so easy questions. That's always a good way to get the discussion also very pointed to some specific areas that you work with. And I look very much forward from the side of the Geneva Academy also to keep engaging with all of you. Thank you very much and have a good day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.